Hey everyone, Corey Fleck here, your host over at the KE Report. This is a replay of a recent webinar I hosted with Snowline Gold and the CEO, Scott Berdahl. This webinar was recorded on Thursday, April 18th. I'm doing a lot more webinars because of the fact that we get a lot of positive comments, and it gives all of you, the investors, an opportunity to ask questions live as well as send them in to me beforehand. Now, this is the start of a series of webinars that I'm going to be hosting with Scott. This first one focuses on the Valley discovery on the Rogue project. The next webinar coming up on May 2nd is going to be focused more on regional opportunities and exploration that the company is looking at this year and in the next couple years. You can send me all your questions for that webinar to my email. It is Fleck, that is Fleck, at kereport.com. I already have a number of questions that I'm going to be bringing up to Scott, and I'm hoping to add to those. So please keep sending me your questions. I'm going to be picking up this webinar as Scott is describing the location of this project and how he came across this project back years ago when he was out with his father walking this land. I hope you all enjoy this webinar, and please be sure to sign up and tune in to that upcoming webinar on May 2nd.
Mineralized corridor really sits in that central part of the valley, so it's ideally located, and we're chasing mineralization up to the northeast. We're chasing mineralization up to the north, and figuring out in the southeast end here, there's you'll see a fault that kind of cuts down through here, and interestingly, we've had our Aurelius discovery sits up on this ridge back here, really in gun sight with that fault. But I'll try to keep this again to the valley. I'm sure I've already made a few forward-looking statements, and I will have some forward-looking views on Valley. That's the whole purpose of what we do, but I encourage anyone to take a look through this. And so before diving in fully onto Valley itself, just a little bit of regional context. It's part of our Rogue project. Each of these colored blocks, Einerson, Ursa, Rogue, Cynthia, and Olympus are Snowline projects. We have over 3,000 square kilometers in the Yukon. Really have taken gone from an aggressive first mover position to more of a only mover position. I think that's been a factor or a result of the dead junior markets that we haven't had a lot of other companies show up on the doorstep, and so we've been able to secure basically a district scale land position over a series of exciting targets covering different potential styles of mineralization. And Rogue and Cynthia, Rogue basically covers a plutonic complex, and so we're targeting a specific deposit type here, though of course open to whatever we find. But this is really informed by that reduced intrusion related gold model, or Fort Knox style gold model that the Valley is. And Cynthia similarly is basically a southern plutonic complex, a very small one, or just a southern extension of the Rogue plutonic complex with similar style targets, as well as some base metal mineralization that's you can see it's on trend with fireweed metals, and also on trend with our base metal targets on the Ursa project. You can see that unit wrapping around. But again, we're jumping into the heart of the Rogue plutonic complex, this 60 by 30 kilometer geophysical feature and geological feature. And Valley's one of target of many.
So Scott, I think one good thing to touch on here is, because you put together this land package, are there any encumbersome on it? Are there any royalties? Are there any other payments that need to be made, or is this just fully owned by Snowline Gold?
Parts of the Rogue project have a royalty, including Valley and including the Aurelius target, and that's from the initial formation of the company and vetting it in. And just for full disclosure, because I know this is a red flag for some people who look at stocks, my family actually owns that royalty. We were the prospectors who put the company together. It started out in the very early stages as basically a sale, and so we were looking out for ourselves as prospectors, and it's transformed and evolved into basically a company launch, and obviously pushing ahead and building this thing. And so I suppose if it helps anyone to sleep at night or influencing their decisions, I have equity exposure to this as well. That was the key part of the deal as far as prospecting goes. So my incentives on that front are very much aligned with shareholders, and not just looking to flip this to realize some royalty gain. So I think that's worth noting. But yeah, Rogue is held 100%. Same with Ursa, Cynthia, Olympus. Parts of Einerson, we have a 30% co-owner on some of those claims, and that's a part of why we haven't been back there in a big way, but we have been approaching that or pushing on that, both kind of with the carrot and the stick to try to get something over the line to reconsolidate that. We would love to get back out to Jupiter, love to test some of those targets in the vicinity of Jupiter. But again, just bringing things back into Rogue. It's 100% owned by Snowline, and coming back into Valley. Yeah, we're pretty excited by what we're seeing there.
Scott, what about that little pocket in the middle of Rogue there? Who owns that? What information can you give us?
So that's a private group or individual even. And we have background data on those claims and that was staked very quickly after we made our discovery in 2021, like the first drill holes in Valley. Yeah, we weren't tripping over ourselves to run out and stake that early on because the data we have there and don't really suggest it's that prospective. At least when you're looking for the intrusion-related gold systems, you're generally looking for the intrusions. And we do have baseline data from an earlier iteration of this project where we have the data that we do have that crosses that ground isn't the most compelling, but nonetheless, I don't mean to throw shade on someone else's efforts out there. And if they find something that would be fantastic, and it would force us to reevaluate our model as we approach this whole district. And so, it would ultimately be a big win for us. We would take a closer look at basically everything in that kind of a scenario. So yeah, it's the claims picked up, and it was also a nice warning shot kind of across our bow. I mentioned, not too many others, really almost no, apart from this one, others coming in here on the back of our discovery. And so that really kind of got us into gear. We were actually already staking. We found our claim posts when we were staking to expand. So we knew about it right away, but it forced us into a little bit of overdrive to really get serious about our land position and to make sure that it's shored up the way that we want it to be shored up. So it's been a double-edged sword and certainly pushed us in the right direction.
Oh, I'm sure it has. I guess final question then. You going to expand on any of these land packages? Do you see opportunity to grow any of these projects?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're always looking, and certainly, our current treasury allows for a little bit more of a push, and we don't have the entire district consolidated just yet. So yeah, there's more to be done. But that said, we're very happy with what we do have, and it is a huge amount of ground. We're looking at over 3,300 square kilometers, and really a target-driven approach to our staking so far. So it's not just that 3,300 square kilometers, but it's a targeted 3,300 square kilometers. Yeah, it's but never say never.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, hey, let's get on to the discovery then. Let's talk about it.
All right. So yeah, I just wanted to walk people through kind of a history of what's out there, and I think that also gives a better understanding of what Valley is and how it relates to kind of the broader Rogue project, and will inform not only this discussion but also our further discussion of regional targets. Right now, so our work, a little bit of work had been done in that Rogue Plutonic complex, base metal program in the 60s, just very broad regional program, a little bit of poking around in the early 1980s. Interestingly, led by a uranium company, but employing the geologist who later went on to work for B2 Gold. So kind of small world in a lot of ways, with them as a passive 9.9% shareholder of Snowline now. So and interesting that they were seeing the gold, and from what I understand, they were more interested in the uranium potential out there, and the gold wasn't enough to kind of tip the scales in favor of coming back here, and so it was just left for to the records that we have in the Yukon. There was another round of exploration in the 1990s that was basically a 2-year effort. 1 year of looking at these, and that was driven by the discovery and development of Fort Knox, where people realized, okay, these systems exist. They're very interesting, and the models started to be built around that time. And so, yeah, a company came in 95, looked at a few of these intrusions, found a lot of gold mineralization. In 96, they drilled a few holes on a few of the different targets, including our Reed target, just to the about 10 kilometers to the east of Valley. And then that was 1996. And so, I can only speculate as to exactly why it was dropped, but other things happened in 1996 that left a lot of projects on the shelf. And so, yeah, and then it sat idle until we moved in there starting with my dad's review of the regional geochem data. And these are actually screen grabs I took last night from a presentation that I put together around that time when we were marketing these. I had just gotten my first job as a geologist and much preferred prospecting. And so I ended up quitting by the end of the season and coming out for the tail end of the season to help my dad out there. And this isn't Rogue on the left, but it is from that same trip when we were up farther north, exploring around, looking at their target ideas. And yeah, we did touch down on what's now our Gracie target there, and we hiked around there, took some samples, found a lot of really interesting mineralization. And ultimately, in stepping back and looking at the data, we picked up these blocks that are in green, and we put them together in basically a district scale package that we optioned out. It ended up being about 5,000 claims over this whole area. Based on what we were seeing here, and based on this lower picture is magnetic anomalism. And so based on seeing this plutonic complex out there, we wanted to really explore the thing quite holistically. So we put together a big land position with the support of that company. And you can see Valley doesn't stand out. This top figure is just the government stream geochemistry data. Those are gold values in parts per billion. So 1,000 of those is basically the equivalent to 1 gram per ton in a rock sample or a soil sample. And you can see, actually, when you get into a number like 20, that is already interesting when it comes to soil or to stream sediment samples. It depends on a lot of different factors, but certainly, I would look at why a 20 is there when you start to get into that range in these things. And you can see there's actually quite an extensive footprint of this anomalous geochemistry, and Valley really doesn't stand out. And so that's pretty interesting on a couple of different fronts. It shows that, okay, there's a lot to learn here. And it also shows, okay, well, what about these things that do stand out? And one of those is Gracie. One of them is Aurelius up here, this stream with the 805. So that's 0.8 grams per ton in a silt sample. The company we optioned it out to did a very good baseline silts program that we have now benefited from as Snowline. And their follow-up sample there was from a different part of that same stream, 1.1 grams per ton, or actually, sorry, 1.2. And so, yeah, all this to say, it's kind of humble beginnings of this project, but it started out with a regional scale idea, and we were able to package it together and go from there.
I find this so cool because it really is a family story. That picture was your dad out there. You and your dad were walking this ground quite a while ago, putting it together.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I should also give a shout out to our Snowline's current chair, Craig Hart. It was his course he was part of a roundup course on various gold deposits and targeting and that kind of a thing. And he had, in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, been a leader in a push to basically put a deposit definition or a model definition when it came to these Fort Knox style gold systems. And so we had been looking at this. We were out there in 2008. I think it was probably January 2009 that I took this course. And, one of the slides was like, wait a minute, I've seen that exact thing. And this is in the deck, or was in that pitch deck at that point, because it was just 1-to-1 for kind of, a different camp that he had in one of his papers outlined with the mag signatures shown. And it's like, okay, well, this is definitely what we're looking at here. And interestingly, actually, Aurelius has been on my mind since then, as well as our target here, which we call Ramsey. As these, you have donuts where you have a big intrusion that is a mag low, but the sediments that it intrudes through, it causes hornfels, which is magnetic, and so you get these kind of donut rings. But in cases you have, and if you look at higher res or even just adjust the contours on this mag, you'll see a donut here where this pluton called the old cabin pluton sticks up. But then you have things like this where you have more of a timbit, if for the Canadian audience anyway, a donut hole for the US. And that suggests basically you're looking above an intrusion. And that's a pretty exciting thing to see, because the tops of these systems are really where the most fertile part of the system is, at least according to the model that Craig set out. And so to find an intact intrusion is a pretty exciting prize in itself. And then when it's complemented by this kind of geochemistry, that's pretty exciting. So I'll just fast forward to 2012. I think we packaged it and optioned it in 2010. The company went out and did a big baseline streams program in 2011, as well as some limited follow-up, and then they did additional limited follow-up in 2012, and that led to the discovery of Valley. So Valley, the intrusion itself, we now know it's about 1 kilometer by 800 meters. At the time, it wasn't on any geological map. It was just totally undocumented. It really shows how unexplored this region is. Shane Carlos in the picture there, his brother Luke, and a couple of others were following up on one anomalous stream sediment sample. It was about 100 parts per billion gold, so a 0.1 or 100 as it would appear in this picture here. Walked up the stream from that, found this canyon of hornfells, so like cooked rocks right next to an intrusion. An intrusion, just for for anyone who's getting lost in the geological lingo here, it's basically a big body of magma that came up and solidified in the Earth's crust, and that's what Valley is. That's where the mineralization is hosted, and it would have reached at probably 5 or 6 kilometers depth or something like that. It would have reached neutral buoyancy, cooled, solidified, made this deposit in place, and then it's since been over tens of millions of years. The surface processes have eroded it down so that it's now exposed. And in the case of Valley, sticking out of the ground. In the case of some of these other targets, either sticking out or potentially just below surface. And so these rocks here in this canyon are the cooked up rocks that are right next to the intrusion. When that magma comes in, it really alters the rocks around it, or it can. And then this map here shows basically that stream comes kind of along these dotted lines, these faults. This canyon was where Shane started grabbing some samples, and you can see he had some pretty good numbers. Those are gold numbers in grams per ton. I believe his brother was up on the hill here, found sheeted vein mineralization. Some of the quartz samples from this outcrop ran up to 10 grams per ton, and then just outside the intrusion found these sulfide veins, which aren't part of the really mineralization in the main zone itself, but they throw off some pretty impressive grades. The best there was 152 grams per ton. And Shane took a chip sample along here that returned really good grades over a broad distance through this hornfells too. So that was kind of what we were going with, and with the observation of the stock up on the hillside, and the stock is just another word for basically a small pluton. All of this is terminology for talking about an intrusion. And so seeing the intrusion at the head of this canyon, just in front of where Shane's standing there, they'd sketched out the north end of this what we now know as the Valley intrusion, or the Valley stock. And when we were out there, actually in that picture of my dad, we climbed up a mountain and looked to the south towards the road from where we were hiking around there. And there was this helicopter flying around with a huge ring on it, like some kind of geophysical survey. And it was just the most bizarre sight, because we were, this was very unexplored country. And so just to see someone flying a geophysical survey out there when there are no other claims out in the region, and that kind of thing. And, it remained just a mystery for quite a while until that data, I believe, was bought by the Yukon Geological Survey and released. And it was like, oh, huh. And suddenly there was it was a huge footprint of what's called ZTEM, like an electromagnetic survey method. And it covered the Valley area and others. And so getting our hands on that was really interesting. I plotted it up, and you look at that polygon that they have here, and it's just a perfect sketch to the north end of this resistive feature that you can see in the electromagnetic data. So that was part of, and there you can see that stream sediment sample that Shane was following up to find that Hornfels Canyon. And so this is kind of what we were going on when we launched the company. That was really all we had as far as Valley goes. And Valley, I've said this many times in other interviews and conversations with people about the company, but we really didn't form the company to explore Valley. It was one target of many, and it remains one target of many. Obviously, it's become I guess a bird in hand, and a very sensational discovery are very robust. You know, we're really happy with what we've seen there. But yeah, it's one target of quite a few out there, and we have a lot more to learn about the district. And I see it as not just a fantastic discovery, but a great proof of concept for what we're looking at.
Yeah, because didn't you start drilling another target before Valley?
We did. We drilled the Jupiter target right out of the gate, and we almost didn't get down to Valley because we were seeing really good things at Jupiter. That was also a very successful first drill program, and you know, if not for the ownership situation I mentioned earlier, we'd probably be back there already. We have the controlling interest, but of course, we don't want to put our shareholders in a place where we're paying 100% for 70% of the gain, and you know that kind of risky capital expenditure, and so we are aggressively trying to reconsolidate that. But fortunately, you know, however that proceeds, we're pretty happy with what we have in the rest of our 100% owned property package. And you know, Valley, I think that as far as most people who are valuing or attempting to value our stock, they're probably not looking too far beyond Valley at this point anyway. So and so yeah, just to get through this history of the discovery, you know, so the top left is basically where we started the company, and we did a really detailed drone mag survey. This isn't actually the most high res image from it, but that is some of the mag data in the background. And then we did a soils grid over it as well, and you see this basically 900 meters by give or take 150-meter soil anomaly covering the thing. It's, you know, it's not the most intact or robust looking soil anomaly I've ever seen. But obviously it's enough. And we drilled our first holes basically where we could see the mineralization. You can see some of the rock samples from that same canyon here. And holes 1 and 2 were kind of drilled trying to optimize a couple of different ideas about structures that were coming to the northeast and kind of parallel to the edge of the intrusion, but also the veins that we were seeing that are valley parallel, and we now know are the real controlling feature of the mineralization. And so first 2 holes had nice grades, more than a gram per ton over 130 meters each. And you know, a great start to that, and starting almost right from surface. So you know, that had us pretty excited. And this Fort Knox style mineralization is generally like you're looking at subground deposits. So this was a pretty good step. Like these are good holes for that kind of a system. And so that was 2021. It wasn't really until the next year that we stepped out. First stepping back across strike, and then stepping out way into the heart of this thing and drilling our hole 7. And that one really showed us that we were into something unique for again, Fort Knox style mineralization. Just seeing the high vein densities, high gold, and of course when the assays came back, multiple gram per ton, very continuous mineralization starting from surface over a big 3-dimensional volume now. And so this is where we are today, with the last of our drill results in from last season and about to start up on our 2024 program in the near future. You can see just kind of combing through these intervals. I mean, this is why we're having this conversation today. Very consistent. And I'll just jump into just a 3D view of things here.
Yeah, I think this provides a good picture for everybody, because there's so much drilling that you've already done, right? But this helps tie it all together.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's some big open edges along, you know, along this thing, especially as we look, that's high grade kind of plunges off to the northeast, and we're seeing good zones of mineralization to the north to chase here. And we're seeing, yeah, great continuity mineralization along about 700 meters of strike. And you see within that, you know, it's not like there's just one vein where we're seeing a whole bunch of gold and it's smeared out. This is just observations of visible gold from the core loggers as they go through, and just plotting it in 3D. And you can see it's very pervasive throughout this whole thing, with higher concentrations in the zone of higher grade. And looking at the cross section, so we're looking basically right along the strike of mineralization. And you can see, I think one big thing to take note of here is just the distribution, where you have this great continuity right near surface, right in the middle of the valley. And that's a key aspect of this. And while we're still chasing a lot of open edges of the system and big zones of rock that look like they could add substantially to what we know is there, we're very happy with how this has taken shape in that kind of high grade near surface central corridor.
Now, would you say you found the extent of the mineralization there? Because we obviously see that high grade core, but then some of those holes on the outside, they do carry gold, but it's of a lower grade.
It is a lower grade. I think that, we've kind of found it at two different levels, where in 2022, we actually very early on found where there wasn't mineralization, because we were taking, after that first big 350-meter step out into the intrusion, we did that kind of again and again, and we're really testing the edge of the system because we wanted to know, like, how big is this thing right away. And so we know some parts of the intrusion are not well mineralized. And then last year, we kind of came back to, okay, well, these were the best holes, and, let's look at this. And it's, yeah, I don't like, in terms of the continuous kind of, call it +2 or even 2.5, like this area where you see these 3 and 4 and even 5 gram per ton intersections that are spanning big distances. I think we've probably wrapped around that, although that's not to say that it couldn't pop up again somewhere else. So we're still, we're still learning about this. But the edges of it are still very intriguing to us. You have things like hole 45 here, where you're looking at 518 meters at well over a gram per ton, with some higher grade within that. And so yes, when you look at this, it's kind of like looking into headlights or something, and it makes everything else look kind of unimpressive. But this would be a highlight hole, or possibly even a best ever hole at similar system, or not similar, but other reduced intrusion related gold systems, or Fort Knox style gold systems. And so when you look at deposits that are in production right now, like Fort Knox, they're operating at an average grade of 0.3 grams per ton with a 0.1 cutoff. Eagle, and Fort Knox, you can say, okay, they're next to Fairbanks. They've had 30 years of production to pay down capex and everything else, and that's fair. Those are good points. But Eagle started up not that long ago, and they're mining an average grade of 0.65 with different parts of the system. I think have 0.15 and 0.2 gram per ton cutoffs. So like these are low grade systems. They work because of the scale, because of the continuity, and because of the good metallurgy, and not so much because of the grade. But again, coming back to hole 45 here, you're looking at right there, you're already close to double the average grade of the Eagle mine, just on the edge of this system. And so yeah, it's definitely come down off the grades here, but we are not closed out when we're still drilling double the grades of a system like that. And you can see how you could kind of push the pit out in this direction and up to the north and so on. So we have a lot of work to do to really constrain that further.
So I guess the way to view that too is this is mineralization that, if this turns into a mine, would come later on in the mine plan, still be economic, but the mine would already be generating cash flow from that higher grade core first and foremost. That would be the initial focus.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty important point. As we push ahead with this thing, like, Valley will be what it is, as we better understand it and get numbers wrapped around it. But for wherever it stacks up in the tonnage and grade kind of curve of different gold systems out there, not many have this geometry, and not to mention the metallurgy, which is very favorable from our initial tests as well. But this is very unique, and I think that's something that really sets Valley apart. Obviously, it does a lot to set itself apart just in terms of these intervals themselves and the scale and the grade that we're seeing and what that will mean for contained gold. But when you have that starter pit, or even really starter mine, given the scale here, where you're mining multiple gram per ton material for potentially years, with very little dilutive material in there, whether internally or stripping or other things, that is rare, and that is valuable. And so if you start to think about, okay, well, what would cash flow look for this? And this is why you have that forward-looking disclaimer in there. But just from a symmetry point of view, you're not going to have a steady cash flow throughout. It's basically going to be front loaded. And so when you think about the time value of money, that's much preferred to just a flat structure with a lot of your production way down the road, years or decades away, just basically to get it out of the ground quickly. There's a lot of benefit to that.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. I think we're tying that all together there.
Yeah, and just I might just switch, so this picture on the left, it shows the top of hole 39, the top 132 meters of that hole average 5 grams per ton. And this is one thing to, I still get questions and comments about this, okay, 553 meters at 2.5 grams, like that's great, but how much of that was contained within a single meter? And people really just have been traumatized, I think, in being around the space long enough and seeing smearing and that kind of a thing. And so that's one thing that, I still haven't fully gotten across, is just how continuous this mineralization is. And so you can see it laid out like this, and it's always frustrating. People invite you to a core shack, and you can bring, 2 or at most like 6 boxes or something like that. And it really doesn't tell the story, because you can pick any 2 of these boxes and they're pretty much the same. But the story is when you lay them out and you have just hundreds of meters of this laid out, and it just box after box after box. And so you can see that going through these tags. The scale is different on the left and right side here. So basically more aggressive, but anything red is 2 grams per ton or higher. Anything pink is 5 grams per ton or higher. And the orange, there are just a handful of orange tags there are right between 1 and 2 grams per ton. And so, again, all of that basically being above the average resource grade, well above the average resource grade, but almost an order of magnitude above what you're seeing in other mines of this type. And on the other side, you don't have a ton for high flying assays in here. So what we've seen when we cap, and we cap quite aggressively at 10 grams per ton, there's no statistical reason to do that. It's actually just more of a practical reason that we started out with, and that's the overlimit value, where we have to do a different assay type. And so, but you wouldn't typically see a cap that low, but nonetheless, when we do caps at 10 grams per ton, we sometimes see no change at all for these high grade intervals because there are no samples above 10 grams per ton. Sometimes we see often we see, like 3 to 5%, and you can look in our press releases and you see we present the uncapped grades, but also the capped, and generally there's very little difference between them. And that applies here as well, where very few of these pink tags are actually above 10 grams per ton. So so that kind of makes it harder to have that really impressive box of core at the trade show or wherever it is, because people walk by and they say, oh yeah, this many grams per ton, okay, and walk on. But had they give us the floor space to lay all this out, you might have a different conversation with those people.
Yeah, it's hard to bring 132 meters of core to any conference, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so really it's consistent. It's consistent and also high grade, and also pretty much right at surface, a lot of this.
Exactly. And so just for what we were looking at there, sorry, try not to activate that video again. We're basically looking at a cross section through from B to B prime. And then I'll just jump ahead to the long section here. And that's the other thing that I'll show people that cross section. They say, oh, that's a nice long section, but what does it actually look like when you, turn it around 90 degrees? It's like, no, actually, this is the cross section. This is what it looks like when you, you pull up the long section. And again, you can basically do your Sharpie on our slide presentation, pit engineering there to start to look at how you might tackle this thing. So we're not in an elusive search for a starter pit or that kind of a thing. This is very clear how you would start to approach this in terms of production. This is from our deck. Just in the interest of time, I won't go too deep into it, but just kind of for context for those who these are just numbers that don't really mean anything. We did some a look at what else is out there. How does this compare? And initially we were happy to be kind of part of the pack, but a lot of the drilling that we've done so far has really eclipsed a lot of what's out there in terms of near surface, potentially open pittable mineralization. And so if you do a filter on holes since 2022 and look at interval lengths of more than 100 meters. So you're looking at bulk tonnage targets and within 400 meters of surface. In some cases, we've had to cap our own drill holes or cup them at that level and just kind of ranking them. We're very happy to have taken a pretty strong position for what that's worth. But ultimately, it shows that there's not much like this out there that's being drilled right now. And some of our peer companies, have great systems as well, but they're different. And Valley really shines in that continuity right from surface, where you're just not looking at much for dilution. And the other place, I mentioned the metallurgy that they have that makes these systems work at places like Eagle, places like Fort Knox, and it's not across the board. I don't think every reduced intrusion related gold system has fantastic metallurgy, but we're very happy with what we're seeing at Valley, where we did a pretty comprehensive first round of tests where we had 10 different 20-meter component or segments of drill core from 10 different parts of the system. We sent those off for just conventional off-the-shelf methods, and those are bottle roll cyanidation, flotation, and CIL, and not optimized for this material. Just kind of let's throw this at it and see what happens. And the average recoveries across those 10 samples for the 3 different methods range from 94 on the low end, 94% to 95.7 on the high end. So with the total population there being 90% of the lowest bottle roll cyanidation, and the highest CIL was 99%. So very recoverable golds coming out of this, low sulfur content. So, when you look at things like acid mine drainage, these are actually naturally buffered by carbonates that are in these quartz veins as well, which is a base. And so sulfides can cause acid when you expose them to weathering, and water gets into them. But with the carbonates in there, this would have a strong buffering effect. So you're basically not looking at that kind of potential. And really, it's just it's a clean rock. It's like a countertop granite with these quartz veins through it, and little specks in the quartz vein show you where these little pods of sulfides are. And within those sulfides, you can see in this section, there's just a lot of gold. Anyway, I know that I've kind of plowed into some of the time you're hoping to save for questions, Corey. So maybe I'll just put a plug in it there, and we can.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you. I
questions.
guess one thing to talk about metallurgy wise too is that when you're early on here, it's really just confirming that you should keep moving forward with these projects. If you get low recoveries, then that can shy investors and also companies away, because there needs to be a lot more work put into these rocks. So these numbers, it confirms that, hey, look, this should be able to be mined in fairly reasonable ways that we already know. But on the back of that, a couple of questions, a lot of questions actually, just about what you're going to do with the Valley discovery in terms of the rest of the land package. Would you consider, is it even an option to consider spinning the Valley discovery, or just the Rogue project generally, off into its own entity, develop that through a company, and then go exploring on the other projects through a different company?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one option, excuse me, of a bunch in terms of, and even within the question, there's a few options lined up of where do you split things out. And I recognize that there's a lot of value to be had in terms of not just tagging on other targets to a main target, but I think right now we're in a place where Valley really drives a lot of what we do regionally as well. And so, we could split things out, and but then suddenly, in this junior market, if we were to do it, say today, I think we'd have a very tough time if our first few drill holes didn't hit on another target, even if we started out cashed up, to then start going back to the markets as that separate entity that doesn't hold Valley kind of hat in hand, and then suddenly kind of going shoulder to shoulder with other companies in what's been a really tough equity space. And so it would be challenging to raise if we don't hit something out of the park right away. But certainly, that's on our radar. We've talked about, do we want to set up structures in advance so that, it's kind of just like a pull key thing ready to go. But again, it comes down to how to separate those out, and whether you just split out Valley, whether you split out, say, Valley with Gracie, whether you split out all of Rogue, and what does that leave us with? So those are certainly active strategic conversations, but right now it makes a lot of sense to me to have Valley as a driver, where if you're a $20 million market cap company and you go to do a $2 million drill program, you're diluting your shareholders 10%. Or whatever the exact number works out to there, but here at 800 plus million market cap, to go do a $2 million drill program is a totally different story. And so we can really afford to take shots and really afford to approach this regional idea in a more systematic and regional way, rather than just kind of going on a prayer that we're going to hit again and get that upside.
Hey, I appreciate keeping it within one vehicle, especially for now. We don't need any more junior exploration companies, right? Keep it within one. Use the Valley discovery to continue to fund other regional work, which we will talk about in that other webinar on May 2nd. Any plans to come out with a resource estimate at Valley anytime soon, within this year, maybe even into next year?
We are pushing ahead in that direction. And there's just going back to what this thing looks like, it's not rocket surgery at this point. Not to say that there's not a lot that goes into resource estimation and that kind of a thing, but this isn't a system where we're going to have to sit back and drill year after year, hundreds of thousands, even millions of meters before we can start to wrap our heads around what's there. So we're pushing pretty aggressively in that direction. I've been pretty conscious about trying not to tie my hands in that, but investors obviously want to know, and so we're looking at getting something onto the table within the next 12 months, and so that's what we're targeting. That's what we're pushing for. Now, if we drill out here back from 45 and get right into the heart of something else, we might have to push that back, and really our initial philosophy was just trying to get around the scope of this thing, really get our arms around the system and figure it out. And that remains our philosophy, but we're pushing ahead to get numbers onto the table because it's a pretty special discovery. And on the back of that, pushing strongly to wrap economic numbers around it as well. So again, that's where I really think this system will shine. And so we don't have to shy away from that of like, okay, here's what we have, here's what's in the ground, and then put off the economics for years because we're scared that it's not going to make money. This is something that I think is going to make money in a whole host of different gold environments. Even if we crash and lose 50% of the value of gold, I would still be confident that this is the kind of project that you want to be working on. So we're pushing ahead on the economics front at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Now, when it ties into future work that you're going to be doing here, do you need to do much infill drilling to even come up with that initial resource estimate?
I guess it just comes down to the quality of the estimate, and the confidence you have in the model. But yeah, we do have pretty decent coverage of parts of the system, and we're still kind of clutching at straws on a lot of the margins of the system. And so yeah, it's a good question, and you could. And also, I think it varies from QP to QP, really how one would classify things and the level of confidence they'd give different things. But yeah, we can certainly do more to de-risk things, and that'll be a part of our upcoming drill program. But yeah, obviously, many people have already started wrapping numbers around things at Valley, and it's the continuity lends itself to understanding with a relatively small amount of drilling.
Okay. Let's talk about infrastructure or potential even all-weather roads, access being built into that valley area and around that discovery. Any conversations with the government? Any updates you can give us in terms of improving access to this area?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess it doesn't quite show on this figure. Oh, it does. The North Canal Road. The Yukon government has been talking for a while now, and the federal government has been talking about upgrades to that North Canal Road, and so that is a government-maintained road. I think it's Yukon Highway number 6. Fireweed Metals obviously also pressing for improvements along that corridor, as are other groups within the Yukon, and so it would be very nice to see that. Nonetheless, that doesn't get you all the way to Valley. The Plata Winter Trail is an old heavy equipment route that serviced the small scale, high grade Plata silver mine. And I say mine with like a built-in question mark because it was I think it was a year or two of production, very high grade though. Like they were flying it by helicopter down to the airstrip to load onto planes to fly out. Like I've never heard of a mine doing that anywhere else. A really interesting story there, but nonetheless, that trail goes into Plata, and then that trail network itself is about 30 kilometers from Valley. And it's a fairly straight shot. I think I have a picture later in the presentation here. Yeah, so this is just a look at Valley looking kind of south, and that's that main body of mineralization there, nicely situated in that central part of the valley with the highest grade stuff right in the middle. And this is looking the other direction there, and there you can see basically just in front of those mountains is where your Plata Trail network comes in, and so that's that's the shot that we're taking. It's not like we have to cross over any mountains like this or anything like that. It's a nice broad valley route to get to the North Canal Road.
Okay. A couple more questions and we're going to wrap it up. But again, thank you everyone for sending in your questions. I'm saving a lot of the regional exploration questions for our next webinar because that's what we're strictly going to focus on. let's quickly touch on these metallurgical tests. Were they done on heap leach, CIL, or flotation?
So we did all three. And yeah, so on the low end, so on a 75 micron grind with a 48-hour runtime, basically just exposing your material to the process. We had on the low end for recoveries was the bottle roll cyanidation, and that was at 94.1. That's really more of a qualitative result that shows that this material can be heap leached. And as part of the current metallurgical program that we have underway, we're doing more quantitative tests where you actually have like a column of this material with a very coarse or much coarser grind size. We have a range of sizes, and that's more like a 6-month test. So, we won't see those results for some time, but that'll give us a more quantitative picture in terms of the heap leach recoveries. But then you have, and of course, there's a trade-off there between your grind size and your recovery, and you want to optimize that. But then at some point, your grade and your recovery is good enough that you want to just put things into a mill. That's the flotation and the CIL. And yeah, the CIL was the highest, 95.7. I believe it was 95 and change for it was either 95 or a bit north of 95 for the flotation average recovery as well. So both of those processes, and again, with flotation, this is not tailored to what we have here. And so part of the processing that we're doing as well is now looking at, like, yes, 95, 96%, those are great recoveries, but can we do more to get that, to squeeze that extra 4 and 5% out of this material?
Okay. Final question, then we'll wrap it up on this. What are the plans for Valley, the drilling, the exploration this year in 2024?
Yeah, it's going to be a big year for us. We have 3 drills parked out there that we're ready to fire up next month. It'll be our fourth, really our third major drill campaign on a target. We're chasing the edges of the system, better understanding how that material runs off in multiple directions and to depth. And then we're also doing a lot of work, as I mentioned, on the economic side of things, like both from a geotechnical standpoint, but also coming back from the exploration completely and looking at building on our baseline studies. We've been doing water quality monitoring and hydrology measurement data from 2022 when we first realized we were into something special, to cut down on those permitting timelines and have a more robust baseline data set that us and regulators and others can rely on. And so, yeah, really doing everything, recognizing that there is a mountain of that front-loaded cash flow sitting out there in the future, and doing what we can to compress that timeline, because that's the other factor there. Like, yes, we can build it out through exploration. Yes, we can de-risk it. But the other thing is, the closer we come to the present, the more valuable it is, just again, time value of money. We'll also be building a 50-person camp on site at Valley, which will increase our drill efficiencies, and it'll increase our overall capacity up there, which will free up our Forks camp for focusing more on the regional exploration. And maybe that's a good segue to the May 2nd conversation.
That is, again, May 2nd, 12 noon Pacific time. We're doing another webinar, and we're focusing on the regional exploration potential. I hope you all can join us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. You can keep on emailing me your questions for our next webinar, and also for future interviews when I have Scott featured on my website and radio show, kereport.com. I'll post a link to sign up for that next webinar. My email address is fleck@kereport.com. That is FLECK@kereport.com. Scott, thank you very much for taking time with us to walk us through this Valley discovery. It's fun to talk about, and it's going to be even more fun talking about some of the other regional potential. So again, Scott, everyone else who joined us, thank you for taking time out of your day today.
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, thanks, everybody.